Welcome to the fifth.
Sixth.
I'm always one off.
You know.
Welcome to the sixth book club meeting of the Celestine Prophecy. And again, I have the pleasure of Jen here in person. So welcome and thank you for joining. You got anything you want to share or start with this evening?
Always. So I have been flying all over the place today. It has been a sacredly wild day. And I would like to ground myself in this space here with everybody. And really take a moment to offer deep, deep gratitude, like deep down into the roots of who we are, the gratitude for us being able to be here, whether it's us being here right now or anybody watching the replay of this, whether you're in the sacred wild or not, we get the opportunity to meet and gather together energetically, because this connection transcends time and space. So it doesn't matter where you are or when you are. We get to be here together, exploring consciousness, exploring energy, opening ourselves to the not knowing, releasing our need, our desire to know, and allowing ourselves to be empty, clear, clean vessels as we explore how energy works in this beautiful world through this transmission of the Celestine Prophecy, this story that allows us to be guided into a deeper awareness, a deeper knowledge into how to be responsible, response able for our energy and how we bring it into this world. We come to this space humbly, saying, I don't fucking know. And in that not knowing, in that nothingness, nothingness, we come as servants, being willing to be guided by these words, by this energy, by this connection, by this love, not knowing what this will transform into as our lives continue after this gathering, and trusting and knowing and knowing and trusting that because we are here now, it is meant to serve the highest and best good of ourself, of all selves on this earth, and the earth itself. And so I humbly say thank you. Thank you for offering us this opportunity, this gift of being here together, of having done the work to be willing to not know, and for the work that we will continue to do in becoming comfortable not knowing in all aspects of our life, to be forever students, for the practice to be mastering what it is to be a student, a masterful student of ourself, of spirit, of each other, and to embody this humbled curiosity, walking in this world with this childlike wonder at every opportunity that presents itself to us, in those magical moments of alignment where miracles happen, where we get to have the precious gift of awareness of the magic that this life is, when our energy aligns with that and dances in harmony with the universe. This work that we're doing, though in this moment may feel small and insignificant, holds massive significance This is the inner working framework, the weaving of the healing that this world is calling for to lead us into this massive transformation that has already begun. We are bringing in a new way of being, a new way of relating, a new way of doing business, a new way of connecting. And in that, the only call that we're being asked of is willingness. Willingness to learn how to love ourselves. The willingness to be willing to end the wars that are going on within ourselves, to end the wars that are going on outside of ourselves, and to learn how to become sanctuary, a place of refuge and safety, a place of safety and freedom. And we are in a training, learning how to hold space, how to witness each other, how to celebrate each other, how to honor each other, and how to see ourselves in the other and bring that other in a warm embrace, remothering the other in ourselves and the other outside of ourselves through nurturing and loving, refathering ourself, the other in ourself and the other outside of ourself, learning how to hold boundaries and create this sacred structure in which we can be free in. And so as we dive into this lesson named the Celestine Prophecy, we come with an open heart, an open mind, a clear vessel to allow all the wisdom to soak in to our genes, to our DNA, to our blood vessels that run through our veins, into our muscles and our bones, into our skin, into our hair, into our nails, into our lips, into our teeth, into our tongue, into our eyes, into our heart, into the tissues, into every cell in our body and every cell outside of our body. We are open to receiving all that's here for us. And for that, we say thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so we begin. I forgot my book at home, so we're sharing. Sharing is caring, my friends. And so I will go ahead and start us off. And we are starting on page 84 at the top of the page. People who don't care about the archaeological value of this discovery at all. People who just want the insight for their own purposes. A huge man with a beard and paunch interrupted the conversation and showed Jensen a list. They discussed something briefly in Spanish. Jensen looked at me again. Are you here to find the missing insight too? He asked. Do you have any idea what you're getting into? I felt awkward and had difficulty expressing myself. Well, I'm mainly interested in finding out more about the entire manuscript. I haven't seen that much of it yet. He straightened in his chair, then said, do you realize that the manuscript is a state artifact and that copies of it have been made illegal except by permit? Yes, but somehow scientists disagree with that. They feel the government is suppressing new. Don't you think the nation of Peru has the right to control its own archaeological treasures? Does the government know that you're in this country? I didn't know what to say. The surge of anxiety in my stomach was back. Look, don't get me wrong, he said, smiling. I'm on your side. If you have some sort of academic support from outside the country, then tell me. But I get the feeling you're just floating around. Something like that, I said. I noticed Marjorie's focus had shifted from me to Jensen. What do you think he should do? She asked. Jensen stood up and smiled. I could perhaps work you into a position with us here. We need more people. Where we are going is relatively safe, I think. And you could find some avenues home along the way if things didn't work out. He looked at me closely, but you'll have to be willing to do exactly as I say every step of the way. I glanced over at Marjorie. She was still looking at Jensen. I felt confused. Perhaps I should consider Jensen's offer, I thought. If he was in good standing with the government, then this might be the only opportunity I had for a legitimate way back to the States. Perhaps I had been fooling myself. Perhaps Jensen was right, and I was in way over my head. I think you should consider what Robert is saying, Marjorie commented. It's too frightening out there alone. Though I knew she might be correct, I still had faith in Will, in what we were doing. I wanted to express this thought, but when I tried to speak, I found I couldn't formulate the words. I could no longer think clearly. Suddenly, the large man walked into the room again and looked out the window. Jensen was quickly up and looking. Then he turned to Marjorie and in a casual tone said, "Someone is coming. Go ask Kenny to come up here, please." She nodded and left. Through the window, I could see truck lights approaching. The vehicle parked just outside the fence, 50 feet away. Jensen opened the door, and as he did, I heard my name mentioned outside. "Who is that?" I asked. Jensen looked at me sharply. "Be very quiet," he said. He and the large man walked outside and pulled the door closed. Through the window, I could see a lone figure silhouetted behind the truck's lights. My first impulse was to stay inside. Jensen's assessment of my situation had filled me with foreboding, but something about the person by the truck seemed familiar. I opened the door and walked outside. As soon as Jensen saw me, he quickly turned and walked my way. "What are you doing? Go back inside." Above the generator, I thought I heard my name again. "Go back inside now," Jensen said. "It could be a trap." He was standing directly in front of me, blocking my view of the vehicle. "Go back inside now." I felt totally confused and panicked, unable to make a decision. Then the figure behind the lights walked closer and I could see his form around Jensen's body. Distinctly, I heard, "Come here, I need to talk with you." Then as the figure approached, my head cleared and I realized that it was Will. I rushed past Jensen. "What's wrong with you?" Will asked quickly. "We need to get out of here." "But what about Marjorie?" I asked. "We can't do anything about her right now," Will said. "We'd better leave." We started to walk away when Jensen called out, "You'd better stay here, you won't make it." I glanced back. Will stopped and looked at me, giving me a choice to stay or go. "Let's go," I said. We passed the truck in which Will had arrived, and I noticed 2 other men had been waiting in the front seat. When we got to Will's Jeep, he asked me for the keys, and we drove away. The truck with Will's friends followed. Will turned and looked at me. "Jensen told me you had decided to stay with his group. What was going on?" "How do you know his name?" I stammered. "I just heard all about this guy," Will replied. "He works for the Peruvian government. He's a real archaeologist, but he's committed to keeping the whole thing secret in return for exclusive rights to study the manuscript. Only he wasn't supposed to go looking for the missing insight. Apparently, he's decided to violate that agreement. He is rumored to be leaving soon in pursuit of the ninth. When I learned he was the person Marjorie was with, I thought I'd better get down here. What did he say to you?" "He told me I was in danger and that I should join up with him and that he'd help me leave the country, if that's what I wanted." He shook his head. "He really had you hooked." "What do you mean?" "You should have seen your energy field. It was flowing almost totally into his." "I don't understand." Think back to Sarah's argument with the scientist at Vicente. If you had witnessed one of them winning, convincing the other that he was correct, then you would have seen the loser's energy flowing into the winner's, leaving the loser feeling drained and weak and somewhat confused. The way the girl in the Peruvian family appeared and the way, he smiled, that you look now. "You saw that happening to me?" he asked. "Yes," he replied, "and it was extremely difficult for you to stop his control of you and to pull yourself away. I thought for a minute you weren't going to do it." "Jesus," I said, "that guy must really be evil." "Not really," he said. "He's probably only half aware of what he's doing. He thinks he's right to control the situation, and no doubt he learned a long time ago that he could control successfully by following a certain strategy. He first pretends to be your friend, then he finds something wrong with what you're doing, in your case, that you were in danger. In effect, he subtly undermines your confidence in your own path until you begin to identify with him. As soon as that happens, he has you. Will looked directly at me. That is only one of many strategies people use to con others out of their energy. You'll learn about the remaining ways later in the sixth insight. I wasn't listening. My thoughts were on Marjorie. I didn't like leaving her there. Do you think we should try to get Marjorie? I asked. Not now, he said. I don't think she's in any danger. We can drive out tomorrow as we leave and try to talk to her. We were silent for a few minutes, then Will asked, do you understand what I said about Jensen not realizing what he was doing? He's no different from most people. He just does what makes him feel the strongest. No, I don't think I understand. Will looked thoughtful. All this is still unconscious in most people. All we know is that we feel weak, and when we control others, we feel better. What we don't realize is that this sense of feeling better costs the other person. It's their energy that we have stolen. Most people go through their lives in a constant hunt for someone else's energy. He looked at me with a twinkle in his eye. Although occasionally it works differently. We meet someone who, at least for a little while, will voluntarily send us their energy. What are you getting at? Think back to when you and Marjorie were eating together at the restaurant in town and I walked in. Okay. I don't know what you two were talking about, but obviously her energy was pouring into you. When I walked in, I could see it clearly. Tell me, how did you feel during that time? I felt good, I said. In fact, the experiences and concepts I was relating seemed crystal clear to me. I could express myself easily. But what does that mean? He smiled. Occasionally, another person will voluntarily want us to define their situation for them, giving us their energy outright, the way Marjorie did with you. It makes us feel empowered, but you'll see that the gift doesn't usually last. Most people, Marjorie included, aren't strong enough to keep giving energy. That's why most relationships eventually turn into power struggles. Humans link up energy and then fight over who is going to control it, and the loser always pays the price. He stopped abruptly and looked at me. Do you get the fourth insight? Think about what has happened to you. You observed that energy flows between people and wondered what it meant. And then we ran into Renaud, who told you that psychologists were already searching for some reason humans sought to control each other. All that was demonstrated with the Peruvian family. You saw clearly that dominating another makes the dominator feel powerful and knowledgeable, but it sucks the vital energy out of those who are being dominated. It makes no difference if we tell ourselves that we are doing it for the person's own good, or that they are children and therefore we should be in control all the time. The damage still occurs. Next, you ran into Jensen and got a taste of what it actually feels like. You saw that when someone is dominating you physically, they actually take your mind away. It was not as if you lost some intellectual debate with Jensen. You didn't have the energy or mental clarity to debate with. All your mental power was going to Jensen. Unfortunately, this kind of psychic violence happens all the time throughout human culture, often by otherwise well-meaning people. I just nodded. Will had summarized my experience exactly. Try to integrate the fourth insight fully, Will continued. See how it fits together with what you already know. The third insight showed you that the physical world is actually a vast system of energy. And now the fourth points out that for a long time, we humans have been unconsciously competing for the only part of this energy we have been open to, the part that flows between people. This is what human conflict has always been about at every level, from the petty conflicts in families and employment settings to wars between nations. It's the result of feeling insecure and weak and having to steal someone else's energy to feel okay. Pass off to you.
Thank you. Wait a minute, I protested. Some wars had to be fought. They were right. Of course, Bill replied, but the only reason that any conflict can't be immediately settled is that one side is holding on to an irrational position for energy purposes. Will appeared to remember something. Reaching into his satchel, he pulled out a bundle of papers clipped together. I almost forgot, he said. I found a copy of the Fourth Insight. He handed me the copy and said nothing else, looking straight ahead as he drove. I picked up a small flashlight Will kept on the floorboard, and for the next 20 minutes read the short document. Understanding the Fourth Insight, it said, is a matter of seeing the human world as a vast competition for energy and thus for power. Yet once humans understand their struggle, the insight continued, we would immediately begin to transcend this conflict. We would begin to break free from the competition over mere human energy, because we would finally be able to receive our energy from another source. I looked at Will. What's the other source? I asked. He smiled but said nothing. The message of the mystics. The next morning I awoke as soon as I heard Will's stirring. We had spent the night at the house belonging to one of his friends, and Will was sitting up in a cot across the room, dressing quickly. It was still dark outside. Let's get packed, he whispered. We gathered our clothes and made several trips out to the Jeep with some extra supplies Will had bought. The center of town was only a few hundred yards away, but few lights penetrated the darkness. Dawn was but a streak of lighter sky toward the east. Other than a few birds singing the impending morning, there were no sounds. When we finished, I stayed with the Jeep while Will spoke briefly with his friend, who stood steeply on the porch while we completed our packing. Suddenly, we heard noises at the crossroads. We could see lights of 3 trucks as they drove into the center of town and stopped. That could be Jensen, Will said. Let's walk over there and see what they're doing, but carefully. We made our way across several streets and into an alley that entered the main road about 100 feet from the trucks. 2 of the vehicles were being filled with fuel, and the other was parked in front of the store. 4 or 5 people stood nearby. I saw Marjorie walk out of the store and place something in the truck there, then walk casually toward us, gazing into the adjacent shops. Walk over there and see if you can get her to come with us, Will whispered. I'll wait for you here. I slipped around the corner, and as I walked toward her, I was horrified. Behind her, in front of the store, I noticed for the first time that several of Jensen's men carried automatic weapons. A few moments later, my fright intensified. In the street across from the armed soldiers, crouched low and slowly approached Jensen's group. At the exact time Marjorie saw me, Jensen's men saw the others and scattered. A burst of machine gun fire filled the air. Marjorie looked at me with terror in her eyes. I rushed forward and grabbed her. We ducked into the next alley. More shots were being fired, aimed angrily, shouting in Spanish. We tripped over a pile of empty cartons and fell, our faces almost touching. Let's go, I said, jumping to my feet. She struggled up and then pulled me down again, nodding ahead to the end of the alley. 2 men with weapons were hiding with their backs to us. Looking down at the next street, we froze. Finally, the men raced across the street to the wooded area beyond. I knew we had to get back to the house of Will's friend, to the Jeep. I was sure Will would go there. We crept carefully to the next street. Angry shouting and gunfire could be heard toward the right, but we could see no one. I looked left, nothing there either. No sign of Will. I figured he had to run ahead of us. Let's run across to the woods, I said to Marjorie, who was now alert and looking determined. Then, I continued, we will stay along the edge of the woods and bear left. The Jeep is parked in that direction. Okay, she said. We crossed the street quickly and made our way to within 100 feet or so of the house. The Jeep was still there, but we could see no movement anywhere. As we prepared to dash across the last street to the house, a military vehicle turned a corner to our left and proceeded slowly toward the dwelling. Simultaneously, Will ran across the yard, started the Jeep, and sped away in the opposite direction. The vehicle pursued. Damn, I said. What will we do now? Marjorie asked, panic returning to her face. More shots were being fired in the street behind us, closer this time. Ahead, the forest thickened and inclined up a ridge which towered over the town and ran north and south. It was the same ridge that I had seen from the overlook earlier. Let's get to the top, I said. Hurry. We climbed several hundred yards up the ridge. At an overlook, we stopped and looked back toward the town. Military vehicles seemed to be pouring into the crossroads, and numerous soldiers were conducting what seemed to be a house-to-house search. Below us, at the base of the ridge, I could hear muffled voices. We rushed further up the mountain, all we could do now was run. We followed the ridge north all morning, stopping only to crouch down when a vehicle traveling along the ridge parallel to us on our left. Most of the traffic was the same steel gray military Jeep that we had seen before. But occasionally, a civilian vehicle would pass. Ironically, the road provided a lone landmark and a point of security against the wilderness all around us. Ahead, the two ridges grew closer together and more steeply sloped. Jagged outcroppings of rocks protected the valley floors between. Suddenly, from the north, we saw a Jeep like Will's approach, then turned quickly onto a side road, which looped down into the valley. That looks like Will, I said, straining to see. Let's get down there, Marjorie said. Wait a minute. What if it's a trap? What if they've captured him and are using the Jeep to lure us out? Her face fell. You stay here. I'll go down there and you watch me. If everything's okay, then I'll motion for you to follow. Reluctantly, she agreed. I started down the steep mountains toward the spot where the Jeep had parked. Through the foliage, I could vaguely see someone get out of the vehicle, but couldn't see who it was. Holding onto small bushes and trees, I worked my way between the outcroppings, occasionally sliding down in the thick humus. Finally, the vehicle was directly across from me on the opposite slope. Perhaps it was 100 yards away. The driver, leaning against the rear fender, was still obscured. I moved to my right to get a better look. It was Will. I rushed further to my right and felt myself slide. At the last minute, I reached for a tree trunk and pulled myself back up. My stomach twisted with fright. Below me was a sheer drop-off of 30 feet or more. I had barely avoided killing myself. Still holding the tree, I stood up and tried to gain Will's attention. He was surveying the ridge above my head, and his eyes dropped, and he looked right at me. He jerked up and walked toward me in the bushes. I pointed down to the steep gorge. He surveyed the valley floor, then called to me. I don't see any way across, he said. You have to move down the valley across over there. He nodded and was about to signal. I nodded and was about to signal Marjorie when I heard a vehicle approaching in the distance. Will jumped into his Jeep and sped back toward the main road. I hurried up the hill. I could see Marjorie through the foliage, walking toward me. Suddenly, from the area behind her, came loud shouts in Spanish and sounds of people running. Marjorie hid below a rock overhang. I changed directions, running as quietly as I could to the left. As I ran, I searched for a view of Marjorie through the trees. Just as I caught sight of her, she screamed loudly as two soldiers grabbed her arms and forced her to stand. I continued to run up the slope. Keeping low, her look of panic frozen in my mind. Once at the top of the ridge, I headed north again, my heart pounding with terror and panic. After running more than a mile, I stopped and listened. I could hear no movement or talking behind me. Laying flat on my back, I tried to relax and think clearly. But the awful specter of Marjorie's capture was overwhelming. Why did I ask her to remain on the ridge alone? What should I do now? I sat up and took a deep breath and gazed over at the road on the other side, on the other ridge. I had seen no traffic while I was running. Again, I listened intently. Nothing except usual forest sounds. Slowly, I began to calm down. After all, Marjorie had only been captured. She was guilty of nothing except running from gunfire. Probably she would be detained only until her identity as a legitimate scientist could be established. Once more, I headed north, my back aching slightly. I felt dirty and tired, and pains of hunger erupted in my stomach. For 2 hours, I walked without thinking and without seeing anyone. Then, from the slope to my right, I heard sounds of running. I froze and listened again, but the sounds had stopped. Here, the trees were larger, shielding the ground from below from the sun, thinning the underbrush. I could see 50 or 60 yards, nothing moved. I walked past a large boulder on my right and several trees, stepping as softly as possible. 3 other massive outcroppings lay along my path as I moved past 2 of them. Still no movement. I walked around the third boulder. Twigs cracked behind me. I turned around slowly. There, next to the rock, was the bearded man I had seen at Jensen's farm. His eyes wild, panicked, and his arms shaking as he pointed an automatic weapon at my stomach. He seemed to be struggling to remember me. Wait a minute, I stammered. I know Jensen. He looked at me more closely and lowered the weapon. Then, from the woods behind us, we heard the sounds of someone moving. The bearded man ran past me toward the north, holding the rifle in one hand. Instinctively, I followed. Both of us were running as fast as we could, dodging limbs and rocks and occasionally glancing back. After several hundred yards, he stumbled and I raced past him. I collapsed between 2 rocks to rest and to look back, trying to detect movement. I saw a lone soldier, 50 yards away, raise his rifle toward the huge man who was struggling to his feet. Before I could utter a warning, the soldier fired. The man's chest exploded as bullets tore through from the rear, splattering me with blood. An echo of rifle fire filled the air.
For an instant, he stood motionless, his eyes glazed, then his body arched forward and fell. I reacted blindly, running north again away from the soldier, keeping the trees between me and the area from which the bullets had come. The ridge grew constantly more rugged and rocky and began to incline dramatically upwards. My entire body shook with exhaustion and terror as I struggled up the spaces between the outcroppings. At one point, I slipped and I dared to glance backwards. The soldier was approaching the body. I slithered around a rock just as the soldier looked up, seemingly right at me. I stayed low to the ground and crawled past several other boulders. Then the slope of the ridge leveled off, blocking the soldier's view, so I jumped to my feet again, running as fast as I could. Running as fast as I could between the rocks and trees. My mind was numb. Escape was all I could think of. Though I didn't dare look back, I was sure I heard the soldier running behind me. The ridge inclined ahead, and I fought my way up, my strength beginning to wane. At the top of the rise, the ground leveled out and was thick with tall trees and lush undergrowth. Rising behind them was a sheer rock face that I had to scale delicately, searching for hand and footholds as I proceeded. I struggled to the top, and my heart fell at the sight before me. A drop-off of 100 feet or more blocked my way. I could go no further. I was doomed, finished. Rocks slid along the outcropping behind me, indicating the soldier was closing fast. I sank to my knees. I was exhausted, spent, and with a final sigh, I released the last of my fright, accepting my fate. Soon, I knew, the bullets would come, and interestingly, as an end to the terror, Death seemed almost a welcome relief.
Hmm.
As I waited, my mind flashed to childhood Sundays and to the innocent contemplation of God. What would it be like, death? I tried to open myself to the experience. After a long period of waiting, during which I had no concept of time, I suddenly became aware that nothing had happened. I looked around and noticed for the first time that I was positioned on the highest peak of the mountain. Other ridges and cliffs fell away from this point, leaving me with a panoramic view in all directions. A movement caught my eye. There, far down the slope towards the south, walking casually away from me, was a soldier, the gun belonging to Jensen's men slung across one arm. The sight warmed my body and filled me with ripples of silent laughter. I had somehow survived. I turned and sat cross-legged and savored the euphoria. I wanted to stay here forever. The day was brilliant with sunshine and blue sky.
Hmm.
As I sat there, I was struck by the closeness of the purple hills in the distance, or rather, the feeling that they were close. The same perception applied to the few puffs of white cloud drifting overhead. I felt as if I could reach out and touch them with my hands. As I reached up toward the sky, I noticed something different about the way my body felt. My arm had glided upward with incredible ease, and I was holding my back, neck, and head perfectly straight with absolutely no effort. From my position, sitting cross-legged, I stood up without using my arms and stretched. The feeling was one of total lightness. Looking at the distant mountains, I noticed that a daytime moon had been out and was about to set. It looked to be about a quarter full and hung over the horizon like an inverted bowl. Instantly, I understood why it had that shape. The sun, millions of miles directly above me, was shining only on the top of the sinking moon. I could perceive the exact line between the sun and the lunar surface, and this recognition somehow extended my consciousness outward even farther. I could imagine the moon below the horizon and the exact reflected shape it would present to those who lived further west and could still see it. Then I imagined how it would look if it was directly under me on the other side of the planet. To the people there, it would appear full because the sun over my head would shine past the earth and strike the moon squarely. This picture sent a rush of sensation up my spine, and my back seemed to straighten even more as I conceived, no, I experienced the same amount of space commonly felt over my head is also existing under my feet, on the other side of the globe. For the first time in my life, I knew the Earth's roundness, not as an intellectual concept, but as an actual sensation. At one level, this awareness excited me, but at another, it seemed perfectly ordinary and natural. All I wanted to do was immerse myself in the feeling of being suspended, floating amid a space that existed in all directions. Rather than having to push myself away from the earth with my legs as I stood there, resisting the earth's gravity, I now felt as though I was held up by some inner buoyancy, as though I was filled like a balloon with just enough helium to hover over the ground and barely touch it with my feet. It was similar to being in perfect athletic condition, as after a year of intense exercise, only far more coordinated and light. I sat down again on the rock, and again everything seemed close. The rugged outcrop on which I was sitting, the tall trees further down the slope, and the other mountains on the horizon. And as I watched the limbs of the trees sway gently in the breeze, I experienced not just a visual perception of the event, but a physical sensation as well, as if the limbs moving in the wind were hairs on my body. I perceived everything to be somehow part of me, as I sat on the peak of the mountain looking out at the landscape falling away from me in all directions. It felt exactly as if what I had always known as my physical body was only the head of a much larger body consisting of everything else I could see. I experienced the entire universe looking out on itself through my eyes. This perception induced a flash of memory. My mind raced backwards in time, past the beginning of my trip to Peru, past my childhood and my birth. The realization was present that my life did not, in fact, begin with my conception and birth on this planet. It began much earlier, with the formation of the rest of me, my real body, the universe itself. The science of evolution had always bored me, but now, as my mind continued to race backward in time, all the things I had read on the subject began to come back to me, including conversations with with the friend who resembled Renault. I recalled that this was the field he was interested in, evolution. All knowledge seemed to merge with actual memories. Somehow, I was recalling what had happened, and the recollection allowed me to look at evolution in a new way. I watched as the first matter exploded into the universe, and I realized, as the third insight had described, that there was nothing truly solid about it. Matter was only energy vibrating at a certain level, and in the beginning, matter existed only in its simplest vibratory form, the element we called hydrogen. That's all there was in the universe, just hydrogen. I observed the hydrogen atoms begin to gravitate together as if the ruling principle, the urge of this energy, was to begin a movement into a more complex state. And when pockets of this hydrogen reached a sufficient density, it began to heat up and to burn, to become what we call a star. And in this burning, the hydrogen fused together and leaped into elements of a higher vibration. As I continued to watch, these first stars aged and finally blew themselves up and spewed the remaining hydrogen and the newly created elements out into the universe. And the whole process began again. The atoms gravitated together until the temperature became hot enough for new stars to form, and that in turn fused the new elements together, creating matter, which vibrated at an even higher level, and so on. Each successive generation of stars creating atoms that had not existed before, until the wide spectrum of matter, the basic chemical elements, had been formed and scattered everywhere. Matter had evolved from the element hydrogen, the simplest vibration of energy, to carbon, which vibrated at an extremely high rate. The stage was now set up for the next step in evolution. As our sun formed, pockets of matter fell into orbit around it, and one of them, the Earth, contained all the newly created elements, including carbon. As the Earth cooled, gases once caught in the molten mass migrated to the surface and merged together, forming water vapor. And the great rains came, forming oceans on the then barren crust. Then, when water covered much of the Earth's surface, the skies cleared, and the sun, burning brightly, bathed the new world with light and heat and radiation. And in the shallow pools and basins amid the great lightning storms that periodically swept the planet, matter leapt past the vibratory level of carbon to an even more complex state, to the vibration represented by the amino acids. But for the first time, this new level of vibration was not stable in and of itself. Matter had to continually absorb other matter into itself in order to sustain its vibration. It had to eat. Life, the new thrust of evolution, had emerged. Still restricted to living only in water, I saw this life split into two distinct forms. One form, the one we call plants, lived in inorganic matter and turned these elements into food by utilizing carbon dioxide from the early atmosphere. As a byproduct, plants released free oxygen into the world for the first time. Plant life spread quickly through the oceans and finally into the land as well. The other form, what we call animals, absorbed only organic life to sustain their vibration. As I watched the animals fill the oceans in the great age of fishes, and when the plants had released enough oxygen into the atmosphere, began their own trek toward land. I saw the amphibians, half fish, half something new, leave the water for the first time and use lungs to breathe the new air. Then matter leaped forward again into reptiles and covered the earth in the great period of the dinosaurs. Then the warm-blooded mammals came and likewise covered the earth. And I realized that each emerging species represented life, matter, moving into its next higher vibration. Finally, the progression ended. There, at the pinnacle, stood humankind. Humankind. The vision ended. I had seen in one flash the entire story of evolution, the story of matter coming into being and then evolving as if under some guiding plan toward ever higher vibrations, creating the exact conditions finally for humans to emerge, for each of us as individuals to emerge. As I sat there on the mountain, I could almost grasp how this evolution was extended even further into the lives of human beings. Further evolution was related somehow to the experience of life coincidences. Something about these events led us forward in our lives and created a higher vibration that pushed evolution ahead as well. Yet as hard as I tried, I couldn't quite understand. I think we're good. I don't know what time is that?
Yep.
Yep. Ooh. We just walked through the whole evolution of the universe.
Yes, we did.
Right there. This is what happened.
Dude, I couldn't help but picture vividly the conversation we were having before we started reading. The privilege of sitting on that mountaintop.
Yeah.
How his perception changed so drastically from running from gunfire to having the privilege to seeing 360 degrees and then going into this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where he's headed right now, but just
Yeah.
going into that gratitude
Yeah.
for that freedom and for that was huge, and it was exactly what we were talking about before we started the thing tonight. So, but it was so vivid in my mind.
So I really want to name that at the beginning of the reading today, the way he describes what we call narcissistic manipulation, or energy vampires is another word, or things like that. And I want to acknowledge and honor how he said that it's done semi-consciously, that it's a strategy that's developed. And we learn this when we study neuro-linguistic programming, is that we as humans create different strategies through life. And a strategy is a neutral word. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's serving us or taking away from us. It's simply a strategy, something we know that works to allow us to get to the space we want to get to. Yeah. And so going into that, we learn those strategies as children. From the age of 0 to 7, we have a blank canvas. And so we are products of our environment. And so think of what your environment was like from the age of 0 to 7. I know for me, the strategies that I created were strategies to protect myself because safety wasn't available. So I had to create strategies that allowed safety to exist in an unsafe situation. And those strategies continued with me. What he was describing was exactly what I grew up with. Making in an environment where the adults that were in my life, my caregivers, made me feel weak and small so they could feel powerful and safe, even though I was a little child. Right. And they are the big grown adults. I couldn't do anything. They were working on their own strategies. And this is how we get into generational trauma. And then when he said semi-conscious or semi-aware, until we as adults take ownership of our emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, we're going to continue to rely on outside sources for that well-being. That's when the energy sucking or taking or dominating comes into play. When we make the conscious decision to say, I am responsible for my own life, and don't take that lightly, because that means that you are responsible for all of it. The delicious and the crunchy and the messy and the beautiful and the fucked up shit, it's all you. However, and when you do that, you also access the power to create the life that you desire. And so going into this ritual, ceremony, initiations, council, tribal elders, those don't exist anymore. And this is the call. This is the time where that call is beckoning to us to not necessarily go back to the way things were. However, create a new paradigm that includes those aspects. We went from one end of the spectrum to the other. And now it's time to integrate into this synergy of the marrying of all the different aspects that we have gone through over the ages. And so I think this is just a call that when we come across those people, well, when we do our work and we are emotionally responsible for ourselves, where we are our own source of love and safety and freedom, the people that try to take our energy, it doesn't work on us. We're innately safe. You can't take that away. We give ourselves safety. You don't decide if I'm safe or not. And we get to choose who we listen to, who we, allow their opinion to matter to us. I have my own inner circle. Oh, my kids, right? And then we have the circle that expands. Then I have a group of dear sisters and brothers there, and then expands more and more. And with each layer, I get to decide who I allow to manipulate my energy. And manipulate is, again, another neutral term.
Yeah. Indifferent. Yeah.
And the people who are in my inner circles, whom I allow the privilege to manipulate my energy, are people that I look up to, who I admire, who there's some aspect of them that I desire to be one day. And I didn't always have that. I gave it to everybody.
Right.
And everybody everywhere. Because at that point, I wasn't self-sustaining. And so I just really love the way he described that. There was no blame, there was no shame. There's understanding. And it still didn't mean that there is acceptance, doesn't mean it's okay. So that was the first part that was like,
I'm kind of lost why he went so deep into that evolution thing. I'm kind of excited to see where that's gonna go. Why that was necessary. There was a lot of detail. There was a lot of explanation there that I don't see a point for. So I'm the curiosity.
Have you not experienced something like that before?
Yes. Yeah, but especially in like medicine ceremony. But yeah, that was intense. It was just super intense the way he did that.
Yeah. It's one of the insights. I'm excited to further that. It's also, it's funny because like now all of the book is coming back to me, so I'm trying to make sure I don't like go forward. But all of this, I mean, it plays such a right now with what's going on in the world. And I say again, what's going on in the world when it's always going on.
It's not new. Yeah.
It's not. Conspiracy theory, Jen wants to know what's going on in the background.
Right.
Why is the media trying to distract us? So that's happening in my brain. And this power struggle, psychic attacks, physical attacks, whether it's in connection one-on-one or it's different religious entities or it's different gendered groups or people that experience life in a different way. Like the time in which differences are something to protect ourselves from is over. It doesn't work anymore. And that's well, that's why there's so much
yeah, it's coming to an
is
end.
because it doesn't work. And we're recognizing that it doesn't work. And in that space, that's the other thing, that in that space, the push and pull, the taking, the resisting the differences, or the attacking the differences, or trying to get everything to be the same, it doesn't fucking work. And what I've experienced personally in my life is that when I fucking stop trying to take and instead give, in BNI, it's called Giver's Gain. There's a book called The Go Giver. If you're in business or if you're just a fucking human, go out, buy it, read it. It's good.
The Go Giver.
The Go Giver. And there's multiple iterations of it. The basic one, I mean, it's intended to be about business, but it's in life. And
well, it's all parallel.
Yeah, exactly. But what would happen if you shifted your perception and stopped asking, what can I get from this situation? And started asking, what can I offer to this situation? What would life look like?
That was such a turning point in my life. Stop taking and start giving. Yeah. I'm so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous for that. Because that just pounded it into my head. And it's so real. It's so... Well, and it's funny because it's exactly what all religions are based off of. It's why religion works, you know, or does it? But it does. It solves a lot of people. A lot of people can grab a hold and get comfort in that. And it's just because when we give, it calms our soul.
It gives us worth, value. And like the mentioning of the religions, like I have the personal, and this is for me, it's not necessarily for everybody else, but this is my perception and belief, is that every religion is saying the same thing, just using different words, and every religion is worshiping the same thing, it's just wearing a different face.
Yeah.
What?
No, I said, yep.
Oh, yeah. And to that point, I think why AA works also along with different religions or spiritualities is that it gives us something bigger than ourselves.
It's just another religion.
A higher power of our own choosing. And in that space, when we allow ourselves to be bigger than what we are, and in turn, the paradox of that allows us to recognize that we're smaller than we think we are. It's that humbling space of there's something bigger than me at play. I'm only a little speck, and I'm a little speck that makes a big fucking impact. I'm a part of the whole, and the whole at the same time. And so, you know, especially with the property management company that I work with, and just when I changed the way that I did business, and in life, you know, in general, is can we walk in life with our intention for everybody to succeed? What would life look like if everybody won?
Right.
Because in my world, that's what happens. There's no losing. Zero losing. None. Everybody wins. And the more people that win, the more I win.
Right.
It's no longer you have to lose so I can win. Or if I want you to win, I have to lose.
That's the old paradigm, yeah. We could just get everybody on board. It's slowly happening.
It's happening, I think, a lot faster and a lot bigger than we think it is. You know, just in these gatherings that are happening all over the world, you know, the more that are popping up, my mentor, Reverend Brianna Lynn, says we create collectives to heal the collective. So we're walking into this era, this time where we are stepping out of the individuation and back into the tribal. And it's going to look different again.
God,
we're not looking to we're not looking to recreate history, but looking to synergize everything that's existed. It's been these separate broken pieces, and now it's time to weave it all together.
Right.
And so we are the weavers that get to sew everything together and see what comes. I mean, taking a look at this new generation of children that are coming in, it is wild to see how they don't carry or shit. Like, and in those moments, like as I'm walking through, it's like I can see clearly the work everybody's fucking done, every fucking generation,
knowing or not.
Yeah. Like my mom went through fucking hell to break out of the routine and the control that her parents lived in. And I went through hell to integrate and transform and transmute that shit. And now I get to have my kids walk in life fucking wiser than I think I will ever fucking be at 12 and 14. They get to walk through life knowing what it is to innately be safe. They know deep in their bones what it is to be loved. They know how to choose for themselves always and in always first. They don't choose for mom first and then they get to choose for themselves. No. They get to choose for them first. And then their kids. It said that by the time it was like 2037, 2047, something like that.
Kids is what I heard.
Yeah.
No more generational trauma.
Not have the energy of fear
right
embedded in their DNA the way we do. They won't know what that is, just like kids nowadays don't know what a floppy disk is.
Or even what depression was, like the depression era. That's just completely gone from us. Like I saw it in my grandparents, but my kids never saw a lick of it.
Yeah. And so
thank God for time.
Like in those moments, especially now, I've heard this so much where it's like I feel like what I'm doing isn't enough. What you're doing is enough. What you're doing is making an impact. It matters. Even if it's waking up and looking in the mirror and say, I am willing to learn how to love you. That fucking matters. If that's all you do during the day is just say that one little thing, that matters. That puts a root down into the ground. And then you do that one thing again. And then maybe the next day you add another thing. And then another thing. Everything fucking matters. Don't ever think that what you're doing is too little, too small, too insignificant. Because it matters.
That's everything. That's with prayer, with meditation, with anything. 1 minute, 2 minutes.
Yes.
Just do it.
Yes. Do it while you're on your drive to work. Make that your prayer time. Or when you're brushing your teeth.
That's how I was taught to meditate. That's how I was taught to meditate, was when I'm brushing my teeth, just brush your teeth. Don't make coffee in your mind. Don't worry about getting the kids ready for school. Don't worry about making breakfast. Just brush each tooth. Like stay focused on your tooth. That was how I learned how to meditate.
Yeah.
It's that simple because we don't do that. We're so scattered. I'm sitting here in this book club and I still do it to this day. I can be thinking of a million things right now, No,
it's a practice.
Just this conversation. Just this book. It's a big practice.
Yeah. And that's like what I was talking about earlier of like, having this deep, deep call to, I keep saying like simplify, but it's that. It's okay,
Focus.
doing just one thing at a time and then being discerning on what things I'm doing because I'm being pulled in 500 directions. What is aligned and alive for me right now? What will serve my highest and best good? And this is so beautiful to recognize because in the past, I'd have all these things calling and only one would serve me. Now I have all these things calling me. All of them serve me. It's a matter of finding what is aligned and alive with serving my highest and best good
At this moment.
at this moment.
Because that can change too.
And so, exactly. And that's where it's the daily practice.
Mhm.
And then it goes throughout the day. And then it's a moment by moment thing. That's the power of integration. It's all of the little tiny things that you do. And in that, but bringing it back, it's that being called to really, instead of doing as much as I can, honing in on doing just a few things
The best that I
and
can.
going deep
Yeah.
and wide and fucking high. And so I've been dropping so much this year, like so much, and it just continues. And then when I've dropped like all of these big giant things, and then it's like, okay, what else are you gonna let go? Because I need you here now. I need you to do this. I need you to do this. That's it. So let everything else go. I'm like, okay, all right, let's do it. Here we go.
Right on.
Oh.
What an evening.
So
Thank
good.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you for joining us.
Mhm.
Feel free to check out the Sacred Wild, come into the community, see what else is going on. The Friday night we do our integration circle. The Gene Keys on
Wednesdays
Wednesdays.
at
What is
it's 11:22 our time, 2:22 in Florida. I forgot what time that is. What time zone that is.
oh, the Eastern? Is that
Yeah,
Eastern?
probably.
There's all kinds of things going on in the Sacred Wild. Come check it out. Come be a part. Tell your friends.
Tell your friends, tell your family, tell that person that pisses you the fuck off.
Right.
They need it the most. Love you guys.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.